Good morning. Thank you so much for joining the Washington Alliance for Quality Recovery Residences for our webinar today on remaining rooted, equity, psychological safety, and wellness. And our presenter today is Dr. Ashley E. Stewart, and I will hand it off to her and let her get started and introduce yourself.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. How you doing today? You can type it in the chat. You can come off mute if your camera's on. I'm looking at y'all, so you can do a dance, whatever you'd like. All right. Well, so good to see you all. So good to be here. As mentioned, my name is Dr. Ashley Stewart, and today our session will be on remaining rooted, looking at and examining equity, psychological safety, and wellness. Good morning, Kalina. This is a topic that is very important to me. It's also one that I find to be very grounded and rooted in this moment. This session really honors, or this series is part of a larger series, but this series in general really captures what change and what support and what collective wellness looks like at a really centralized point in time. So I'm excited about it, and I'm excited to be here with you all. I'm grateful to be here too, Barbara. All right. And so we're a nice small group. So because of our size, I welcome a few things. I welcome questions all throughout. I know sometimes facilitators will say, like, wait until the end. You ask questions at the end. I'll create time. Please feel welcome to ask questions all throughout. You are welcome to come off mute. You are welcome to put it in the chat. I will be monitoring and looking at the chat the entire time, as well as listening or watching to see if you unmute to create space for you. So please feel welcome to jump in. This is a collective process. And because we're a nice small group, I am going to, if at all possible, create an opportunity for everyone to introduce themselves in the space. I think it's nice to learn a little bit about what type of work people are doing, what's important to you about the work that you're doing, and who you are. So we'll jump into that in just a moment. So a little bit about me. I am the Director of Strategic Transformation at C4 Innovations. That focuses on health equity and behavioral health more broadly. I love the work that I'm able to do at C4 Innovations, including some of our amazing work that we've been able to do at SAMHSA that allows me to be here. I'm also a professor, a full-time professor. I've been teaching for surprisingly about a decade now at the university. Prior to teaching at Temple University, I was at Columbia University teaching, and so really excited to continue to teach interdisciplinary courses. I also have experience as a provider, providing mental health services, providing direct service and practice-oriented work. Very proud to be an award-winning consultant around evoking and inspiring lived and living expertise to develop our knowledge around different social issues. And my research focuses heavily around implementation science. How do we create and craft change in identity-based forms of oppression? I am considered in many spaces a subject matter expert, but as I mentioned earlier about the importance of lived expertise, I really see the places where my life intersects with the work that I do as a person with lived experience to be the most central form of my knowledge that I utilize and bring into every space that I have the opportunity to. We won't get into it too much in this session, but one of my biggest areas of implementation science is a theory-informed, evidence-based practice and phenomena-informed framework that I developed called the Equity First Framework that takes organizations from aspirational to action. And so that's a little bit about me in terms of my work as in implementation. I would really love to learn a little bit more about you all and the folks in this room. And so I'm going to just welcome folks to popcorn around and introduce yourselves. I just pulled up the list of participants so I can see folks and welcome you all to share. If you want to just share your name, where you're joining from, where you work, and one thing that you really take away, maybe, oops, sorry. A takeaway or a favorite memory of the work that you do, maybe something you really love about the work that you do. All right. And does anyone want to go first?
I can go first.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine.
Okay, I'm Catherine Ferenti. I work for Catholic Community Services in Everett, Washington, and I work in the Permanent Supportive Housing Department. We help house chronically homeless individual or unhoused individuals, as well as they must have a disability to qualify for our program. And I do housing case management after, to a continued service. And I love working with people that have lived experience because I learn so many things from people all the time, and they're brilliant. So that's my favorite part of the job, is learning from my clients and the people that I serve.
I love that. I love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah, you're next on my screen.
Hi, yeah, I'm Sarah Carter. I'm the accreditation coordinator here at WAQRR, and I love what I do. I love the people that I work with. They're phenomenal in what they do, and their compassionate care. All the providers that we have accredited are just really making the world a special place to be for folks in recovery.
Awesome. Thank you. Joanna? And Joanna might have stepped away. Samira? And I recognize that some folks might not be able to come off mute, might be listening only, and that's okay too. So folks are welcome to introduce yourselves in the chat as well. Andrea? Or Andrea, if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. Okay. Barbara? Barbara B, because I see we have a Barbara B and a Barbara L.
Hi, I'm Barbara. I am the women's staff coach at Truly Motivated Transitional Living, which is we have a program for people in recovery from substance use disorder. And I think the one thing I love the most is just being able to be hands-on with the women on a daily basis, and really love it when you see the light come on and people get it.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I see Barbara L is typing, so Barbara L might be typing your introduction. Awesome. Thank you, Joanne. Nemo or Nemo?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Nemo Abdullahi. I use she, her pronouns, and I am with your community in Federal Way. We are an umbrella of Peer Washington. I'm a program manager for the Peers in the Libraries program. And I think my favorite part of the work that we do is being able to share my lived experience with folks, being able to relate to them, and also being able to kind of meet people where they're at. So thank you. I'm really glad that I'm here today.
Thank you, Nemo. It's nice to meet you. Marie.
Hi, I'm Marie Preftasarens. I work for the state of Washington Department of Children, Department of Children, Youth and Families. And I'm the SUD lead for Region 3, which is everything from the Snow King border all the way up to the Canadian border. And the favorite thing that I do in my work is educating social workers around SUD, and also like just dispelling myths about addiction and recovery. A lot of our social workers don't have the education around substance use, and can make some, pretty critical decisions regarding families and keeping families together. So I like to be able to step in and say, wait a minute, you didn't see all sides of this. So that's the favorite part of my job.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Jody?
Hello, I think it does say Jodine on there, but I actually go by Jody. And I work for Catholic Community Services. I see a lot of us on here. Permanent supportive housing. I'm a housing case manager for Snohomish County, and Catherine kind of shared what we do in helping folks stay housed. And I don't think I have a favorite part of the job. I just like it. Yeah.
All of it.
I mean, it's definitely mentally challenging sometimes, but I don't think I could see myself doing anything else. So I just like it. Yeah.
I love it, Jody. Nothing wrong with loving all of it, right?
Yeah.
Crystal?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sydney. Hi,
Yeah.
I'm Crystal. I am a case manager at Lydia Place in Bellingham, Washington. We are a housing agency that specifically focuses on families with children, which tends to be an underserved niche in the homeless community. And I guess my favorite thing about the job is I spent a decade in dementia care before I moved into this work, and I think just being able to see the long-term effects and changes and continuation of working with people and like watch them make those changes out of coming out of a world where like everything you do gets erased 10 minutes later has been really impactful.
It's very impactful. Thank you for sharing. Chanel, thank you for sharing and introducing yourself in the chat. Nice to see you. Kenzie?
Hi everyone, my name is Kenzie Birch and I work for WAQRR and I'm part of the accreditation team. I'd have to say my favorite part of the job is just obviously the people that I work with. It's a great group of individuals, but that not every day is the same. And even when you feel like you know everything, we're still constantly learning and, dealing with new avenues of this recovery journey with individuals. So I think that's probably my favorite part.
Awesome. Thank you. Kalina, thank you for introducing yourself in the chat. Nice to see you. And as well, Ellie, thank you. Nice to see you. Jasana, I know you just joined not too long ago. We're just doing introductions if folks want to on come off mute or put it in the chat, but I welcome you too as well, and Jessica also.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for hosting this meeting. And I work for Fair Start. I'm a case manager there. I've worked there for about 7 years now. I love what I do. I love connecting with folks from all walks of life and who are needing job skills, a second chance to re-enter and to find sustainability and to self-actualize. It brings me joy, and I'm excited to be here and to learn from you all. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I see folks type in. I see Jasana and Samira texting, putting in the chat. So we look forward to learning more about you all as well. I see quite a few folks, so other folks might be here also. So I want to start here our conversation here. This is what I like to refer to as compassionate, action-centered conversations. These are principles or values that I start every single conversation with, whether it's as a facilitator or if it's me doing training or work directly with an organization. They're not only things that I ask of us during our 2 hours together today, but they're also things that I use immediately in practice, and I recommend that people also use as they hold conversations that are about compassion, that are about equity, that are about creating space and remaining rooted in equity, psychological safety, etc. So equity, so as we think about these conversations, the first thing we want to do is to expect a lack of closure. We want to recognize that it's a journey. We don't walk away from any one session or any one practice having fully been able to grasp all that there is, but we continue to work towards it, particularly when we're thinking about psychological safety and equity. We leave with more skills and more insight as to how to create an environment like that moving forward. As for clarification, with 19 of us in the room, it's inevitable that we'll have 19 different experiences or variations in how we experience topics. So creating a space where we can ask for clarification is so important. Want to embrace discomfort as things grow, as we are pushed and pulled, and have that excitement of learning new things. That excitement can also come with some nervousness or some discomfort in our bodies. A lot of times it's a natural cue for us to evade and avoid feelings of discomfort. But when it's about creating or changing culture, making spaces new, providing different ways of approaching situations, discomfort shows up in that as well. And if we can embrace that at times, that discomfort is indicative of us growing, then we can really experience it differently. We want to honor all experiences and expertise. Both come in many different forms. Often, when I talk about this, people think that I'm referring to learned expertise, but I also want to make it very clear in this space, we're also uplifting and honoring lived and living expertise. So if, as we're talking about any topic, you have a personal experience with it, know that it'll be honored and that space will be created in this environment. There's also an importance for a safe and brave space. In any given space that we're in, there might be some things that come up that feel really safe and like juicy, and we're excited to dive into it. But then there are other things that are going to require a level of bravery for us to show up, for us to be able to participate in it. And finding a nice balance between safety and bravery is very important in any space that we're part of. Revisiting welcome is my personal favorite. It starts with this understanding or this expectation that we all understand or process information differently. So some of us, as we have this conversation, the thoughts might come to your mind. You might be really clear on what it is that you want to say or how you want to engage. Whereas for other folks, it might be 10 slides later. To be honest with you, it might be tomorrow. It might be when you're taking your shower, like when your best thoughts start to come together and you begin to put the different pieces and see a full picture of how you really experience something. And all forms of processing are important and add value to conversations. And so establishing a cultural dynamic that allows for revisiting to be central, for people to come back to things, to talk about things after the fact, is an important environment for inclusivity to allow for people to come back. So if I'm 5 slides away and you want to talk about something that was on this slide right now, do it, because that's a core value here. Affirm and give credit. We want to hype each other up, celebrate each other. Hopefully we have a very active chat throughout our session today. We want to listen to understand, acknowledging that agreement might not be a goal. It might not even be possible. So we want to listen to hear folks. I often think about the basis of human cognition. When someone's asking you something, you start to immediately formulate a response. This has been conditioned in us since we were children. You go to school, the teacher says 2 + 2, you start to formulate your response in anticipation of being called on. So this natural part of cognition that has us preparing our responses sometimes can hinder our ability to be very present in different conversations. And so we might be listening to respond or listening for agreeability as opposed to listening to understand. So we want to give ourselves, our minds, our bodies, the grace to be able to listen, just to be present and to hear folks. We want to be accountable for the impact of our words and actions. Sometimes we'll intend for something to land one way and it lands differently. And in order for us to even be accountable for the impact of our words and actions, sometimes we have to shift our relationship with accountability. So my second favorite is accountability is kind. And in accountability is kind, it begins to reposition the framing that people could be called in or called out, or some of the reasons why people are uncomfortable engaging in some of these conversations in the first place. Because in full transparency, some of us haven't had the best experiences. They have been hard, they've been contentious. Maybe sometimes you've seen someone, be called out in a way that doesn't affirm or didn't create a space for other people to feel comfortable to share ideas in the future. And so accountability is kind moves into a space that says, okay, we're looking to remain rooted. We're looking to have compassion and equity and psychological safety within our environments, within the services we provide for the communities we serve and among ourselves. And so if that stands as the base and the foundation of what it is that is our goal, then accountability acts as a very intentional form of kindness. I'll use myself as an example. Let's say that I say something that would prevent someone from feeling included or welcome into a certain space, and someone brings that to my awareness and say, Ashley, I know you're committed to reducing harm. You care about the populations you serve. You experience them as brilliant um, brilliant people who you learn so much from. I noticed that when you use this language, it might have created a space that didn't feel as safe for other people. That accountability is kind on multitude of different reasons. It's nice because it allows me to be accountable for the impact of my words and actions. I can go back and I can address it or fix it. It's kind because it navigates from the assumption that I am here to reduce harm, that I am here to do good, I am here to support people, and allows me to be seen for that version of myself. It's also kind because it takes a little bit of courage to tell me that. So on all fronts, accountability can be really kind if we reposition it and refocus it as a value. In order to do that, we have to be gentle with ourselves and others, to give ourselves grace. I talk about it all the time. I'm a person who studies different forms of biases. I know pretty much most of what you can know about biases. I'm also human, right? And so the importance of being gentle and kind to yourself and give yourself grace is essential because it allows you to be accountable and it allows you to make change. I might say something and want to stand on the table. I'm like, oh my goodness, I've written books on this. Please trust me, believe me. But the importance is that I'm able to observe it, acknowledge it, and then make difference moving forward. And then we cannot challenge what we cannot acknowledge. I love this framing. It reminds me of the work of like Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw and James Baldwin. Not all and not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. So we bring things and we put things on the table to talk about it and to begin that process of creating a structure of change. And so I'm going to pause here for a moment to say, one, do any of these stand out to you? Like one that you particularly like? Maybe even one that you use in different spaces and you find to be helpful. What do y'all think? What are some that you particularly like? You can put in the chat or come off mute.
Accountability is kind.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of my favorites too, Jessica. Yeah, Rhonda puts in the chat listening to understand, and so does Marie, right? Yeah. Even if we don't agree. Lately, I feel like in spaces, a lot of folks typically agree, but there's so many different topics that we're all processing at once. The likelihood of agreeability is definitely declining. And so I've noticed lately, I feel like we've been in more situations where it's likely or probable that people aren't in agreement on different topics. And how do we have impactful conversations? It does. Thank you so much. Ones that stand out to you, any particular like? Yeah, embrace discomfort is huge. Mm-hmm. I agree, Rhonda. Okay. Well, with our rule to revisit, if you are typing into the chat actively, please don't stop typing because I changed slides. Please continue to type it in the chat because this conversation is a continuation. So it's important to stay true to ourselves and our values during times of change. I've been leaning into this analogy of like things being rooted because sometimes when there's so much change going on, and I really like to honor change fatigue and what that does to our bodies when so much is happening at once, when so much is changing, it can feel like a time to shrink. And so this is not a moment to shrink, it's a moment to root deeper. Navigating, providing support during complex times requires us to have those deeper roots, to really understand and assess our values, to really think about who we are and how we intend to show up to support the communities that we're servicing, and what things are important to us in terms of how we're able to support people. And so in times of change, I find this to be especially important. But I also think that it's also important to be transparent about our experiences. For those of you, if I have any folks who are Office fans in this room, any Office fans? Because I'm a huge Office fan. You might recognize my friend here, Michael Scott. And, a lot of times, many days, that feels like how I'm showing up in many of the spaces, just thinking, experiencing this like cognitive overload where you're really trying to grapple with, understand how you might be able to support folks with limited resources, be able to provide folks where there's so much discomfort existing, being able to show up when you're experiencing so much in our personal lives as well as in our professional lives, seeing so many different people impacted within the communities that we're working with, observing people in fear. It is real what you all are experiencing, and that's why I wanted to start off. I know it can take a little bit of time to have people introduce themselves, but I also am here to honor the work that you all are doing. You're going and creating spaces for recovery in communities where people are needing it the most, where the need for your services, the need for your support, the need for you is going to continue to increase in very, very explicit and drastic ways. And recognizing that many times we're doing this with limited resources. A lot of times we're doing this while also being deeply connected to the work or it being personal to ourselves. And many of us are doing this in places where there may be experiences around resistance, where you're building trust, where you're trying to connect with folks, where you're trying to expand your services, and you're doing it in places in residences and within communities where people trust you, where people feel connected to you, where people see you as a place of hope. It's not a light, it's not light work that you carry. It's deeply meaningful, it's deeply important. And so we also want to ensure that you're getting resources about how to show up in these spaces, how to engage, and how, most importantly, in my opinion, to be well in doing it. So you saw this quote on the slide with the tree. This is not a moment to shrink, it's a moment to root deeper. In times of backlash and fear, our values must not just survive, they must lead. Staying true to ourselves, to yourself as a leader and as a provider, also means anchoring in your why, even when you feel pressure to silence it. So that's why I asked for a favorite memory, even if you didn't get to share or contribute to that conversation. Thinking about your why, thinking about what really engages you or motivates you in this work is so, so important. When I say the word compassion, what comes to mind? When I say compassion, what comes to mind? Empathy, caring about others, thoughtfulness, and kindness. understanding and kindness. Yep. Right? We have to know what compassion feels like. It feels open-hearted. It's experienced open-heartedly. Yeah. Acting for the sake of others in this broken world. Right. Maria, I want to really amplify an element of that, and you'll see why in just a moment. Being not judgmental, being gentle with other people. Yeah, it's all of these things. If you're typing, please continue to type. It's all of these things that you are describing. Compassion is a term that embodies and encompasses a lot of things at once. And I think that that's an important distinction about what makes it compassion compared to something else. I notice that we talk about compassion a lot, but we very rarely define it. And so this is compassion for others, as well as you can see on the slide, self-compassion is that empathy plus action. You feel that empathy and then you take action towards it. Going back to that acting on the sake of others, right? That understanding, that kindness, that open-heartedness, that non-judgmentalness, that gentleness, the care and the empathy, the thoughtfulness and kindness, putting that into action. Compassion is broadly defined as the awareness of someone else's suffering. We can substitute that word for other things. Sometimes I don't necessarily use the term suffering, but certainly many people are experiencing very significant and impactful shifts that are detrimental to their lives. People are suffering through trauma and suffering and abuse, suffering through lack of resources, suffering with systemic and structural oppression, and a multitude of other things as well. And that is combined with a desire to help to alleviate it. We can go back to the original Latin roots, which means to suffer together, that connectedness that you all were just talking about, reflecting the core of empathy feeling with people, and the desire to be in solidarity that with someone who we perceive as suffering. We can sometimes describe it as the feeling that arises when you feel when you feel with someone and you feel really motivated to alleviate that from other people. It's different than sympathy, and it'll make sense as to why I'm talking about compassion in the context of change fatigue and psychological safety in just a moment. Compassion is different than empathy and sympathy in a couple different ways. Compassion requires empathy, which is why the two come together for us a lot. Compassion requires empathy. Empathy is the capacity to feel with someone or to understand another person's emotions. It's putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It's like, I feel with this person. Sympathy is often refers to feeling for someone, maybe not necessarily shifting or changing your posturing to try to understand it, but you feel for someone. Sympathy can be more distance. Compassion is that requires a deeper connection. And so I like to use just like a silly or lighthearted example of like, if I were walking by and you see me trip and fall, most of you would feel something. You would either feel sympathy for me, you're like, oof, that is embarrassing, right? You feel for me. You're not trying to imagine what it feels like to be in a situation. You don't necessarily feel compelled to do anything, but you feel for me. You're like, that's embarrassing. Some of you might feel empathy. You might feel with me. You might get that sympathetic pain that comes along with it. You might experience a secondhand embarrassment with me. You're feeling with me. And then some folks might have a compassionate response where you might feel that and then want to come over and help me up, or you might feel it and want to maybe distract other people to allow that space for that person for me to get up and be able to do so with the time and, you know, with the dignity of like being able to brush myself off, or you might check in later and say, I just want to make sure you're okay, that desire to do something, that actionable piece. And so a lot of time in the work that you all are doing, you're really engaging with a level of compassion. And that's really important as we think about the connection to psychological safety. One of the things we know about compassion is that it shows up differently in our brain. There are different neuropsychological studies that show that while compassion is a skill that people have, it's also a choice, and it requires a different level of effort. And that level of effort can be rewarding for ourselves as well. When we look at the brain, we can see that empathy and compassion involve multiple parts, and that they engage neural pathways that are associated with positive feeling and reward centers. So feeling motivated, feeling, release of feel good chemicals in our body. So compassionate responses can actually be affirming and less emotionally draining because we are able to contribute or feel like we're able to do something about it. The reason why I bring this up and I talk about the importance of compassion is because when we're able to be compassionate, it does something for us that's helpful, that's useful. But a lot of times we maybe feel like we don't have the right resources, or we feel like we aren't able to help people. We don't feel safe enough to speak out or talk about different topics. We feel silenced in what we're doing, and that has consequences for our wellness as well. And that can lead to things like compassion fatigue, and that can lead to um, empathetic distress because we are limited, we feel limited, and in many cases are limited in what we're able to do, or just as importantly, we might feel silenced in being able to advocate or say something or reflect on something. So why is compassion so important for psychological safety? And why start off talking about psychological safety for our topic for today? In our earliest understanding of the concept of psychological safety, we know that it's grounded in understanding to the extent that which people feel confident in their ability to navigate change. Here we're in like 1965. So I think that the 1965 definition of psychological safety is just as pertinent, or if not more important in this moment, because there is so much change that's happening on a daily basis. We're seeing such an influx of constant change that many of us aren't experiencing psychological safety because we don't feel secure or confident in our ability to navigate change, or with the constant and chronic changes that are disruptive. And I don't know about you all, you could put it in the chat, but I feel like I've heard people talk more about psychological safety right now than I have in the past. I have a couple theories as to why that is, that we're talking about psychological safety more right now, but I'm interested if you also feel like you're hearing the term more now than before. We then go into 1990, and we see this definition be expanded to describe people's comfortability or ability to show up as your full self to the work and to work. And so you see that in 1990, we start to get more work-centered with the definition of psychological safety, evading and avoiding negative consequences in showing up as our full selves. A further expansion of this leads to definitions that are more central to different types of teams. 1999, Edmondson, who's often coined with developing the concept of psychological safety. This is where different groups of people experience acceptance. So this is like feeling safe to navigate change in the context of doing so with other people. And if we looked at definitions of psychological safety today, it's often described as feeling safe with an asterisk, because I acknowledge that safety looks different based on our identities and our positionality in different spaces. But feeling safe to take risks, to advocate, to intervene, to disagree, to propose new ideas, etc., without the fear of repercussions. Our ability to demonstrate the value of diverse and creative ideas without judgment. Psychological safety is important for us to be able to engage with compassion, to be able to show up and do our work with the best outcome for ourselves as well. I love these two quotes. These two quotes stand out to me among many different elements or aspects of the work that I do. If an environment feels threatening, we'll tend to conform in order to achieve a sense of safety. Leaders who are willing to take this on benefit from more innovative conversations, greater organizational learning, and people feeling truly confident and engaged to show up as their true self. So Patricia Hewlin's quote here really, really is heavily utilized by me because this first line, when an environment feels threatening, we'll tend to conform in order to achieve a sense of protection and safety. This plays a huge role in equity and creating an equitable environment where all people are able to engage, to be included. And in order for any type of diverse environment to thrive, equity is looking at those gaps that exist and persist and the experience that many people feel having to change or feel like they have to alter inherent, natural, unchangeable elements of themselves in order to feel a sense of safety and protection. This is a very important conversation, especially in the context of psychological safety, because if we look at this next quote, which focuses on psychological safety by Ellen Boder, when our bodies and minds experience safety, our social engagement systems enable us to collaborate, to listen, to empathize, to connect, to be creative and innovative and bold in our thinking and in our ideas. And when we are able to establish a space where psychological safety is possible, this has positive benefits for ourselves, for the people we're serving, for the folks who are residing in our residences, for people who are a part of our communities, and in life in general. So this tends to be really important and understated in the work that we do. And so going along with this concept of roots don't relocate in a storm. And, I have a couple people in sessions with me who are passionate about trees and roots, and we've had some really dynamic conversation about what actually happens in storms with roots, right? Either they go deeper and they get more grounded, or that things are uprooted. And so as the stable, secure, necessary part of our communities in the work that you all are doing, that you self-described as being so critical and necessary for the wonderful and amazing people who you have the opportunity to serve in your work that you've identified, it is so important that those roots get deeper and stronger and continue to be more expansive, which is inevitably what happens in storms. So therefore, in that moment, it's important to uphold our values and values-based decision making, to lead with psychological safety and cultural humility, to protect reflective spaces and create space for people to continuously be reflective, and to resist urgency culture, prioritizing the necessity for humanity over the need to be constantly productive. And so we want to navigate through the truths that some of what we need to do is urgent. That's different to say like we have urgent needs that we respond to. In your work, you're constantly responding to urgent matters. But it's also to say that urgency culture is something different. And in urgency culture, we just try things, we throw things at the wall, we try to see what sticks, but maybe without as much intentionality and thoughtfulness around what it means to prioritize humanity in those decisions. Any thoughts or questions before we move on? Me too, Rhonda. So there's certain skills that we need in order to continue to promote psychological safety. This includes awareness, vulnerability, empathy, and compassion. And compassion builds to psychological safety because it actively repairs trust. It repairs rapport and builds rapport. It creates that non-judgmental support that you all mentioned earlier. It empowers collaboration, it allows for de-escalation, and active prevention of re-traumatization. Right? So it's multi-directional. Compassion leads to psychological safety, but also psychological safety allows us to have compassionate responses, action-based responses, thinking creatively and innovatively about solutions that promote wellness for ourselves also. For me, that clarification around what is compassion really helps to set that fire underneath it all, to say that what we're doing or the ways that we're showing up are not they're not without great impact. The way that you continue to persist or pour into yourself enough that you can continue to persist in this world creates a truth that you are able to then engage with solutions that are informed by the people who you're serving, with your thoughts and your innovations and your advocacy, with in solidarity with the voices of people who you're serving. And in doing that, that creates a safer, more psychologically safe and more compassionate response for all of us, which is beneficial. And that we don't often talk about. And so in these conversations, as we kind of set the foundation here, one of the things, like I told you when I first started, is I'm big on implementation. So I like to talk about things and provide context, but I'm also really big on, like, how do we take something from an idea or a concept or something that's really nice, like, yeah, it would be really great if we could have psychologically safe workplaces and everyone was able to be in compassion and I could be able to advocate. And because I'm able to advocate, I feel really good about what I'm able to do. And I have all the resources. Like, all of that is a wonderful aspiration. And a lot of times that's where it gets left. But I'm also really passionate about taking those concepts and saying they can be actionable. These are things that we're able to do, and giving us steps and practical insights as to what those next steps will look like. So we're going to engage in a conversation about an ecological approach and honoring that all parts of our experience matter. In doing so, I like to first define an ecology. While some of us might be familiar with ecological systems models and theories, one of the core theoretical frameworks for my personal framework, some of us might not have heard of ecological systems theory. Some of us might not know what an ecological approach is. Some of us may and have never defined an ecology, so I like to start there. An ecology is a branch of science that's concerned with the interrelationships of organisms and their environments, right? People and places, us in the spaces that we occupy. The second part of that definition that I think is also really important is that the pattern of relations between organisms and their environment. So it's not just us in one space in our life, but it's us in the multitude and the complexity of spaces within our lives, the relationships between the places and the environments, the people and the spaces. The third part is my favorite, and it talks about how it's often an intricate system, how it's complex, because we are intricate, we're delicate, we're complex. And so what we're really talking about here is people in environments, right? Me, you, and the places, spaces we occupy. So I ask you all, what is one value that you will not let be compromised no matter what the external pressure? Maybe that value is like service to other people, uplifting the voices of the people you serve, right? Um, dignity and worth of people, the importance of relationships. What is a value that you have that you feel really connected to? People's voices matter. People deserve to be safe. Hate has no place, Chanel. That's beautiful. Yeah. Hate has no place. It's powerful. Others, what's a value that you have? Kindness in all things. That consistency and kindness. Being true to ourselves while serving others. Yeah. I love to present and talk about inclusion and authenticity and how authenticity is important for ourselves and what that looks like, especially in the context of our identities, Ellie. So I'm grateful that you bring that up. Integrity. Yeah. Being able to recognize and respect the humanity in all people. Reliability. My goodness. People experience so many changes, especially the people who we get to serve in our work. And to be able to rely on someone is essential in healing. And these are great. Please continue to share. So to talk about how to move this actionably, or like what are some things that we can do to ensure that those values stay true, that we're able to serve others, that we're removing space for hate and reinforcing it with inclusion and love, that we're promoting kindness, that we're creating spaces where authenticity and truth to ourselves is possible. What do we get to a space where how we talk about people or how we create our work is integritous and we're able to move at that heightened level of integrity? How do we get to a space where we recognize and the respect and humanity for other people, reliability for folks who maybe didn't type in a value, but you're looking at these values like, I want that to be a central value of the work that I do. These are some of the ways that we can begin to make that shift and move toward it in a more equitable, trauma-informed, psychologically safe way. We want to think about biases. Now, when I usually talk about biases, it perks up a bunch of ears for folks sometimes. And one of the things that I'd like to clarify at the very, very beginning of a conversation about bias is that bias is a normal part of human cognition. Bias is a normal part of human cognition. Bias is a normal part of human cognition. And I think that emphasizing that is so important for a number of different reasons. Well, one, biases can be positive, they can be negative, they can be neutral. I have a bias that folks who join more in a meeting to talk about remaining rooted in equity and psychological safety and collective wellness are some of the greatest people on earth. That is a bias that I have. It's so far my bias is being proven to be true, right? And so we can have positive biases. Sometimes our biases are neutral. But oftentimes when we hear about or talk about biases, we're usually referring to negative biases because those are the ones that tend to cause the most issues. While my bias that the folks who get on in the morning to join a call about remaining rooted are the best people in the world, not too many people are going to challenge me on that. Not too many people are going to check me on that. And not too many people have a reason to think that me believing that or spreading that information is harmful or detrimental to other people. And so in order to understand how to evoke change or create spaces of change, we recognize that creating a space of inclusivity ends up being everyone's lane. It's not just one person's role or responsibility. It's actually a collective process for us all. And so I like to talk about what is the problem with bias and culture change, what is an issue that emerges as we talk about bias and culture change. And to do that, I like to talk about our most evidence-based and scientifically validated information we have about biases. One thing I know for sure, because the research says it again and again, or that biases are a normal part of human cognition, that we all have biases. I like to also acknowledge that there is not a lot of evidence that bias trainings work, and we're going to talk about why. We also know that people who do some of our most heavily studied assessments of bias, like the Harvard IAT, don't typically like it. And the same reason why people don't like the Harvard IAT is the reason why it becomes so difficult to talk about biases. Has anyone taken a Harvard IAT on this call? Okay. IAT is an implicit association test, and it's widely used. The last I looked, there were 50. Yeah, I think the last one I took over, it had 50 million responses. So, I mean, a lot of people have 50 million people. And that might be some recurrent users, but even if we took just half of that, it is still just such a populous data set that it's incredible. The reason why, yeah, so some folks in the room who have taken it might be able to share, like, agree here that people typically don't enjoy taking the IAT. And the reason why is because it gives you some prompts and then you indicate an image with the word. And inevitably, there's a lot of room for human physical error in doing that. Because what the IAT is doing is a screening for our initial automatic implicit biases. And when we try to address biases, we try to change people's individual thoughts. Like you see these two dots here. Let's say that they are people. It's like your thoughts and my thoughts. And when people finish taking the IAT, it's like, well, that's not actually how I feel, or there's complexity or context to my responses that are important. And so a lot of times people feel really attacked when we talk about biases because it's your biases and it's my biases. But what makes the assessment so profound and the impact of biases so profound is that our biases are actually more connected to our environment than it is to our own individual thoughts. What we perceive, how we understand things, and how likely we are to demonstrate a level of bias of some sort is more so connected to the broader environment around us. So when we target it and we try to address just this person's bias and this person's bias, and we make it so individualized, we negate the big, broad impact that it has. The reason why biases are so pervasive and have such a huge impact is not because I have a bias, but because I share my bias and you agree, and someone else participates, and someone else jokes, and someone else laughs, and we all begin to have this conversation, and someone repeats it, and then it gets to a point where someone has experienced it by 5 other people and says, yes, this is a fact. And then that continues to cycle until it becomes part of the culture. So I like to think about this particularly as you think about the stereotypes or stigmas that the people who you serve encounter. People hear it again and again from a multitude of different people. Someone agrees, someone participates, and then someone says, well, it's a fact. People from this neighborhood are like this. And then there's a culture that begins to shift about how people from this particular area are treated, or how people with this particular diagnosis are treated, or how people who are in recovery are treated. And all of these individual biases become this broader cult, has this broader cultural, larger impact. And so that's the problem. And that's why bias trainings typically aren't effective, because they focus so much on the individual. That's not to say that as individuals, we don't work on our biases, but really as individuals, our impact is in shifting or changing that complex web that you see there on the side of the screen. Because it could happen in the same way, just like biases could be positive, negative, or neutral. So can our interventions be around these positive, negative, or neutral biases. So sometimes that might be developing our confidence, our skill, our comfortability to disagree, to challenge, to just inquire. I noticed that you said that. Has that been your experience with most people? Opening the door for more critical dialogue will greatly reduce the likelihood that a bias will lead to culture shift. And as we develop our comfortability and our readiness to do that within our own environments, the higher the probability that that culture will shift to, that it will come to a space of balance where people will ask more questions, or people will be more inquisitive, and where those stigmas and those stereotypes and those harmful biases will begin to deflate. And so we have more impact or more influence over the areas and the environments that we're in than we think we do. But this also requires us to be mindful and intentional that it is everyone's lane. Yeah. Any thoughts or any questions? I'm gonna pause here for a minute. And just join you all in the room before we go into the second half of our conversation today. I just want to sit with that for a moment and check in with folks.
I found this discussion around bias really empowering and informative, and I really love how you brought in the piece that it's culture has a lot to do with it, and that we also play a role in how we show up in the environment and how we can make those changes just by showing up fully and holding on to our values. And it's just like a really powerful reminder of the steps that we can take to ensure a psychologically safe space and to not cause unintentional harm to the community we serve.
Wow. That's a beautiful summary, Jessica. Thank you so much. That was a beautiful summary. Yeah. Ellie, reading your comment. Yes. Shares culturally relevant discussions, particularly around a Hawaiian Muslim client. I worked with them in the past. It really woke something in me, just the ability to share about culture and past experiences and how it affects our life experiences. I think that's also just such a beautiful reminder that a lot of times we shape the people's conceptualization of what's okay to talk about, what's appropriate to talk about. A lot of people, particularly people with complex experiences and or people with a lot of intersecting identities, haven't always had those conversations feel welcome or feel validated or heard or seen in sharing that. And so it might not be something that someone initially or intuitively will bring into a space for a number of different reasons, including trauma to that point, right? And so as folks who are culture shapers, our ability to open the door for those conversations and those discussions and create an environment where it can be talked about has such a huge influence on the overarching culture. Right. She felt safe enough to share those things with you, and you felt honored to have that trust. We open the door for those conversations to be possible. Every now and then someone will bring in their perspective or share their perspective and we have the opportunity to welcome it. But a lot of times those conversations aren't happening because we didn't take the opportunity to open the door to create an environment for those conversations to happen. So I think that that's such a wonderful reminder that in this process too, sometimes we're the folks who intentionally create the space for those conversations to happen. Yeah, that's great. Other thoughts? You see a couple folks unmuted, so just giving a pause in case someone wants to share. Oh, Andrea, I saw you unmute. Did you want to say anything? Or Andrea, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. Okay. That's all right. So we're gonna talk a little bit and the remaining part about self-care, organizational care, and collective wellness, which is a big part of what is needed in terms of next steps. And you can't talk about wellness without talking about self-care to some extent, and we'll put an asterisk there as we dive into a conversation about self-care. So let's do it. Okay. All right. So you might see this little GIF of this kid who's clearly upset about something, right? And a lot of times, this is how you can feel when you're having to make so many shifts or changes. I keep coming back to this concept of so many things changing. We don't necessarily always want to experience change. Sometimes that change feels like a compromise. Sometimes that feels so overwhelming or overstimulating in our bodies. And so I want to create space for that, to acknowledge that. And so a big part of that is asking ourselves or identifying, what are our goals? How do we begin to engage in our goals without necessarily compromising, without removing a space that we know to be true, without not leaning into those values that you all established or described? And a big part of that is about strategizing, innovating, and honoring. So I like to talk about what is self-care really. And I don't know about you all, but I find that sometimes even when talking about self-care, the term self-care can be activating for to people for a multitude of different reasons. People are like, well, what really is self-care? Who really has time for it? It kind of puts this burden on folks. Some people love the concept of self-care. Some people feel like it's not very clearly defined, which is frustrating. And then some people feel like self-care is it's kind of like how people sometimes feel about work-life balance. Like, if you have the luxury or the ability to, sure, it's great. And so one of the things that I was tasked with was coming up with like a really clear definition of self-care and what self-care would look like for people like yourselves, who are providing services, who are showing up and giving so much of yourselves to the communities every single day. And in a very, very extensive, wide scale search of commonalities and definitions of self-care, one thing became really, really clear. And there's a lot of different definitions in that. No one agrees on what the definitions of self-care is. And I think that contributes to why so many people have an interesting relationship with it. It might feel cliche. It might feel something that is inaccessible to people because we don't actually get into the complexity of it. And so we're going to spend some time getting into this complexity of it. And I'm also going to bring up some important points that often show up after I talk about this topic that I think is nice, because once people bring it to me as a question, I can then incorporate it into future conversations. So while there's a lot of difference about self-care, one thing that is central and clear and not debated is that self-care is an essential practice for our mental, physical, and psychological wellness. There's very little variability in that belief system around it, no matter where we're occupying. So some of the different definitions of self-care that we might have heard of before, or things that are described as spending time with ourselves, taking care of our physical and mental. This might be expressing more gratitude, engaging in more mindfulness exercises, taking time to exercise, mindfully eating and enjoying our space and places. Meditation, all of these things would be described as activities that pour into or engage your physical or mental health. I would say that this is probably one of the more pervasive definitions of self-care that people tend to lean into the most. Balanced meals, a different outlook, setting priorities, doing relaxing activities that help you feel grounded. Other definitions of microaggressions involve or focus on like treating yourself or doing something that's markedly different when you start to feel overwhelmed. So that's going out and getting that really good dessert, or taking the vacation, maybe a spa day, or something markedly different that's treating yourself, that's going above and beyond what you would normally do to take care of yourself, to do something that is nourishing in a different way. One perspective offers that the term self-care is co-opted and misrepresented, and is a preservation of liberation in the face of social change and forms of challenge that people are experiencing. If you're not able to fully express yourself authentically or show up in your fullest liberated self, then you're not experiencing self-care. That's a whole section or area of self-care that there's a lot of research to support. Some literature about self-care is described as medical adherence, taking your medications, ensuring that you're taking the orders, recommendations that are suggested for physical and behavioral health conditions, right? Supportive strategies, going to your appointments, going to the different therapies is a form of self-care. And then there's finally some other literature that suggests that self-care is inherently community-centered, that if you're not doing collective practices and if you're not doing self-care together, then it's not inherently self-care, that it involves many different shifts in our lives that involve other people. I think that providing the different definitions of self-care is important for a couple different reasons, because we could see that maybe our values align with some of these definitions differently than others. I also think that showing all the definitions can also help to validate why people can sometimes feel overwhelmed just in thinking about, okay, I'm told I'm supposed to do this self-care. What does that look like for me, and how do I do it? Because there's so many different options. The other thing that I think is especially important to talk about when self-care, and going back to the point I made earlier of people asking questions after it, one of the reasons why people have such an interesting relationship with self-care is because self-care has been used to describe behaviors that have caused harm to folks, to people, to their communities, to the people around them. And there's a huge difference between self-care, which means doing something that's caring for yourself, and then different like self-indulgence, or self, I guess some people would describe it like selfish or self-centered behaviors. Like, what really is the difference, or where is that line drawn? And so when you think about what is something that is caring for yourself, it's creating an environment where you can be the best version of yourself, not only for your own wellness, but also for those around you. When you think about someone who's caring for themselves, they're filling back up that cup so that they can continue to do the awesome work that they're passionate about doing. Without pouring into themselves, then we're not able to fully show up for those people in our lives. And so the impact of self-care is one that is very much beneficial to ourselves, but also has this more expansive impact also, meaning that it's healing, helping, or supporting other people because you are filling up that cup. And that's an important distinction. Yeah. That's a very important distinction, because there are things that people are doing that are experiencing different coping mechanisms for ourselves, which could be like self-coping or self-soothing in many different ways, but that doesn't mean that it's caring for ourselves. And so it's important that people have the opportunity to process through, is this something that's caring for myself, or is this something that is soothing a condition or an experience that I'm having, and it feels like a form of self-care in the moment. So these are different forms of opportunities for self-care. This could be cultural expression, movement. This doesn't always mean physical exercise, but it could be dancing while you clean. It could be, skipping to your car after work, right? Rest, having the opportunity to meaningfully rest. This includes sleep. time to recover. We might have difficulty sleeping. This might include sleeping. It might just include relaxing and resting back, right? Because sometimes folks tell me I have trouble with sleeping. If I'm not able to sleep, does that mean I'm not engaging in self-care? Is anything that's caring for yourself that could just be being in a restful state? Nourishment, food and diet and nutrition looks different to different people. So this isn't about eating particular foods. Your nutritionist might have a different perspective, but being able to do things that feel honoring to yourself and having a routine around nourishment that works for yourself and for your body. Emotional expression, having the opportunity to express yourself and your feelings. Quiet time. Quiet time could be meditating, taking a break. It could be that 15 minutes that you sit in the car before you go into the house. I don't know if anyone else does that, but whatever that mindfulness moment looks like, it could be listening to music. So sometimes that quiet time is just quieting out the other things around you. I once had I did an exercise where I asked people what does self-care look like for you? And we really broke down this notion that it had to look one particular way. And we really thought about like, what does that look like for different people? This last one of being able to define wellness and self-care for themselves. And some people have some really interesting things. Like someone said hiding the desserts and the vegetable packets in the freezer. So I asked the kids, do you want peas? And the kids like, no, I don't want peas. And I'm like, all right. And then out comes the ice cream bar later in the day, or when that downtime comes, they're like hiding desserts and vegetables. I supported it. That's their form of self-care. Someone told me picking up heavy stuff and putting it down. Right. And I support that. Watching your favorite movies. Yes. And I don't know about you, but for some people that means again and again. There's no amount of time that I can watch The Office or The Grinch that will make me feel like I watched it too many times. Yeah. Right. You have hobbies or interests that you're able to look forward to each week. Making social connections, spending quality time with people who make you feel safe and supportive. And then defining that self-care for yourself, being able to create that definition and what that looks like in various seasons, because it might not look the same day to day. And then there's this element of self-care. So a lot of times I'll talk about self-care, wellness, and collective wellness, which is what the topic focuses on today. Obviously, I like to honor individual practices because it matters. And collective wellness also matters so much. In fact, a lot of times when I talk about burnout or things like that, burnout's often seen as an individual's problem. If you're burning out, it's because you're not balancing things right, or there's an opportunity to balance things different, or there's an opportunity to do this or that different. And one of the things that I like to open the door and to create space for um, when we think about burnout is that it's also an organizational issue. Burnout is an organizational issue too. It's collective. It may mean that there's opportunities for mutual support that could be really beneficial to people. And so we want to think about things like secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, and compassion fatigue. The term secondary traumatic stress is something that many people, especially folks in your area of profession, are likely to experience. So if you observe or present or are supporting someone through something that is extremely stressful and or possibly traumatizing, that means that you have the possibility of experiencing some of those symptoms yourselves. You start to experience the stress, the hypervigilance, the anxiousness, the emotional burden of what it is. A lot of us are experiencing secondary stress as we watch things that are happening on the news. You begin to feel with and maybe even are having difficulty sleeping. I've been having a lot of secondary stress and trauma, looking at the impact of what's escaping my mind right now? Oh, like the how different forms of synthetic substance uses are impacting youth throughout the country, right? Like I have a lot of secondary stress about that. And then some of us will have vicarious stress, vicarious trauma, which is often described very similarly to secondary traumatic stress or secondary stress, but there's a slight difference and slight nuance that makes it important to look at. And one of those distinguishing factors is that the experience with vicarious stress is that your worldview also begins to change. So your cognitive schema begins to shift. All of a sudden, you start to feel like maybe you're experiencing it too. Like you look at the person who's being impacted, and that starts to feel like it's close to home. You might start to think that you are experiencing it not just in like feeling with or for other people, but you're also experiencing it because you look like the person, or they're from a similar neighborhood to you, or their story reminds you so much of yourself. And then so you're starting to walk around and experience it through a change in cognitive schema. And then, of course, we talked about compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is heavily alleviated um, when we're able to take action, when we're able to show up, when we're able to get those reward pathways. But over time, without a lot of support, we might start to experience compassion fatigue, which is why collective compassion is such a strong healer to compassion fatigue, because it removes the burden of having to figure out all the solutions on our own and creates a more communal approach to creating solutions. Any thoughts or questions here? Yeah, vicarious trauma doesn't often get talked about as much, so I'm glad I could bring it into the space. We have here change fatigue, compassion fatigue, and decision fatigue. And I like to talk about these three because we don't often talk about them as much. With change fatigue, happens when people feel like so much is changing and that is overwhelming. This could happen in two different ways. It could be that so much change is happening and that's overwhelming, or it could be that people have been trying for change for a very long time and not much change is happening, and that is emotionally draining. That's very fatiguing. So you have change fatigue show up like that as well. Compassion fatigue, we just talked about, and then decision fatigue. Decision fatigue, I think, is really interesting as well, especially for folks like yourself who make a lot of decisions on a daily basis, and especially for the people who you serve, who have to make about 10 times more decisions than the average person before they even make it to your office that morning. And so a simple way to kind of contextualize ourselves or understand decision fatigue was described to me once as you give a group of people 5 ice cream options, and then you give a group 25 ice cream options. And we would all think like the 25 is great because, I mean, it's just a lot of creative options for ice cream for people to choose through. But what ends up happening is that the group who has 25 options feel less confident in that decision, more overwhelmed, more fatigued by the time they even get to eating their ice cream. Whereas the group who had the 5 decisions, they picked, they were happy with what they chose. They definitely didn't want that other one. And so they're confident in what they're able to do. And so it helps us to see that there's an energy depletion that shows up when people have to constantly, chronically make decisions. And so some of us might have experienced this and might have been described or experienced throughout our day. Like, I just don't want to make another single decision. That could be absolutely decision fatigue. And we really want to think about it for the populations who we're serving, because typically those decisions are about safety and wellness and life-saving impact. And so I'd like to talk about organizational wellness, because both individuals and organizations have a place and a role in creating spaces of wellness. You see here that It might be in supervision. I have the opportunity to engage in, participate with regular supervision, promoting general self-care, overall well-being, and in those spaces, including feeling like you can consult with peers, feeling like you have colleagues or folks who support from different perspectives, feeling like you have a chance to do professional development, to be able to come to a space and learn something new, learn new terms, learn how to apply it, feeling you have the resources to feel like you can accomplish something in a reasonable amount of time. Sometimes resources are tangible resources, like a place to provide services, or a treatment modality that's needed to provide a type of service. But sometimes the resources is time. You are able to show up authentically in your work environment. It could be a form of wellness, and feeling like you're able to establish boundaries. Now, some of us boundaries will look different because many of us might use our lived and living experience as part of the way that we create healing environments. So that idea of like professional boundaries is important to examine and to make sure that we're not perpetuating a single definition onto it, but instead it's about ways that you maybe share your lived experience or show up and bring the authentic element of yourself into your work in a way that also promotes wellness for yourself. As we go through these organizational wellness, sometimes I like to treat them as a checklist. It's not likely that we'll have all of them, but what are some that maybe I could begin to implement that would promote more organizational wellness? Or if you're someone who oversees a team, is there something you can do to create this type of space that would promote more organizational wellness? So rather than saying all of these things are needed, these are options or opportunities or ways to lean in even more to create safe spaces. This also includes supportive spaces, people where you can go and get relevant mutual support. You have time to reflect and create self-reflection. I did a lot of this work with people in medical professions after COVID, and especially folks who like do your very hands-on engaging community work after COVID, because there was so much that was required, and going into one space and being happy for people and celebrating with people and their wins, and then going in another space and having to have really difficult conversations about next steps and limited availability of space and limited availability of recovery resources, and that influx of emotion between different types of conversation causes huge emotional strain. And so having time to self-reflect, going from case to case or person to person or community to community, but also making intentional space to say, how did that show up for me emotionally? Am I okay, right? And if I'm not okay, that's all right, but do I have a support space to kind of process that through? A lot of us really avoid intentionally going home and stress rolling onto our families or loved ones, but we also don't necessarily have that space of work. So where does that emotional energy that you put into your work go? There needs to be a space for that. Feeling like you're able to balance and organize and manage your workload. That might not be something you're able to do anything about in terms of reduction of workload, but maybe it's physically how that information is organized could be really helpful. Feeling like your environment is conducive to productivity, feeling like you have intentional time to enjoy your meals, not just grabbing them wherever you can go, being able to set realistic, achievable goals each day. And like, unless you're like me and just put a whole bunch of stuff that maybe you're, at the end of the day, you're like, I still have 20 things to do, right? Can you establish achievable or realistic goals, or even create like a system? Building healthy teams that enhance workplace morale, and of course having external supports that can support with that as well. So promoting wellness serves and functions on a multitude of different capacities: cultivating authenticity, committing to culture change, addressing different forms of inequity, and then building accountability structures. So for anyone who's leading teams, these are things that will be really important to think about so that those lists can even be possible. Establishing psychological safety, promoting equity, and engaging in collective wellness is everyone's lane. And so I start this question here to give folks a chance to think about it. I'm going to ask it again at the end about what would support look like. So I pose this question now so you can start to think about it and we will come back to it. We want to be able to be prepared, not only for when there's storms, but when there's resources again, when we have another yes, when we have that influx of community members who are going to need additional support, being ready to do so and embrace that work from an equitable lens is so important. And again, I remind us that equity is about looking at the gaps that exist and persist and being willing to create and innovate solutions. So we have to recognize that one of the major pitfalls we have when we do have that major increase in people seeking services. Maybe that's an increase in funding that we can soon hopefully anticipate at a later time. Maybe that is the right partnership that comes along with another community organization. That might be a multitude of different things that can change in the environment. These are ways that we can be really strongly rooted and be ready for that next turn. One of the things is we want to ensure that we're not doing equity. It's not a 10-point step plan. It's a whole person, whole system changes, that culture shift that we talked about earlier that can really provide a concretizable, sustainable solution to culture. It's not something we silo or have a specific team do, but that team is integrating their findings, their knowledge back in and making it accessible to everyone. It's not that you have one really strong, charismatic leader, but that everyone is feeling prepared and empowered, that their voice or their perspective, as we talked about in psychological safety, is going to be validated and utilized in ways that help to innovate and create solutions. We don't want to just get to a point where we're back on, we're in go mode and we're throwing things at the wall and we're seeing what sticks. We're going to be intentional about um, creating pathways and plans that support the work at its most deepest level and moving away from superficial solutions to more concrete ones. And so one of the ways that we can do this is by engaging in authentic change. So the first step in addressing authentic change is acknowledgement. This is a framework that you could then take and utilize within groups or within yourself or with groups of folks who you work with. What are things that need to be acknowledged as you're serving communities? What are things that need to be acknowledged? What is the truth with clarity of things in past and present? Where do we have opportunities to work with? Is that with supporting team members and doing this work? Is this with creating access to community members? Or is this with how we advocate for different people? It can be applied to any of these different situations. Maybe it's in specific house dynamics, all of those things. We want to acknowledge with clarity the past and present. That's the truth. It helps to build truth in the conversations. The next would be accountability. How do we build trust and take accountability for our missteps, our ignorance, our participation, our lack of awareness? And sometimes we haven't done anything wrong, but it's just a missed opportunity. We recognize that there's an opportunity to do something different. And then we lean into action. Action is where we get into a trauma-informed approach. We're able to demonstrate our awareness by stating actionable steps towards a different outcome, which will ultimately lead to authentic change. When we acknowledge the truth of situations, we're accountable and engaged in action-focused solutions. That's how we build trust that is trauma-informed. So I like to put it differently. I like to say, if I come up to you and I say, oof, I'm sorry that what I said made you feel that way. I'm sorry you felt that way about what I said. You're like, okay, she apologized, but it's not necessarily something that feels grounded or that you can take something and apply it with. But if I come up to you and I say, I want to acknowledge that what I did was more deeply rooted than I even knew about. And I want to take accountability because when I did this, it had these impacts, and now I see that. And as a result, I'm going to do this in the future. That's going to feel more authentic and that change is possible. So we then take this framework and outside of accountability over apologies, we apply it to our different approaches about how we do community engagement, about how we lead our staff meetings, about how we start the conversation about addressing biases and creating a culture of inquisition within our communities by acknowledging with clarity issues of the past, by taking accountability, by saying we have this wonderful opportunity and we want to be accountable to it to make a next step. And as part of those next steps, this is what we're going to do. This can really be a good platform to start conversations within your teams, to address the community more broadly, to bring to your board. It applies in a multitude of different scenarios. And then I like to often end on this note about how do we strategically engage with ingredients for change. One of my wonderful colleagues uses this graphic a lot, and people love it because it feels so tangible. I don't know if anyone in here is good at baking. I am not, so I won't be making any recommendations about baking because it will be wrong and your cake won't come out right. But I can do it for organizational change. Rhonda, I love that you put that in the chat. The fun fact about it is it originated as I called it accountability over apologies, and it was used in a therapeutic relational context in couples therapy. And then we applied it to work with like national leaders around like national recovery leaders coming together to then use this to address the public and address advocacy. And then from there, we started using it with different organizations to work on internal organization needs as well. So it's great that it like still resonates in the personal, because it does. It works really well in our personal relationships too. So going back to me not being able to bake and embarrassing myself by telling you all that, I do know that you need all the right ingredients. And if it says 2 eggs and you put 1, it's not going to come out right. And if you says baking powder and you put baking soda, not going to come out right. Similarly to when we are thinking about how to create change and build an intentional and thoughtful change practices within our organization, we also want to have those necessary ingredients. So let's say folks leave here and you feel like you have the skills, you're like, yeah, that's helpful. And I know how to do that. You have the skills to do it and you feel incentivized to do it. You feel like you have the resources, the time, the support to do it. And you have an action plan. We're going to start off by really thinking about how to engage conversations around bias within our organization, for example. But you go into a space and people don't have the vision. Why are we doing this? What is this? It's going to lead to confusion, right? And maybe just in general, when you're initiating or engaging in collective wellness, people are apprehensive to it or confused about it. It might be because people don't have a broader vision as to why we're doing it and what it's for. But let's say you have the vision and people know why we're doing this. People also feel like it's important. People are feeling really burdened and dysregulated. And so there's that shared vision as to why this is important. And people feel really incentivized to do it. People want to. There's the resources. We've made the time. We're developed the group who's going to focus on these key priorities. And we have an action plan for how we're going to do it over a span of time. But people don't know how to do it. People don't physically know what does that look like or how do we take those next steps to make that happen. That can lead to people feeling really anxious, right? Anxious and nervous. You might have the vision. You feel confident on what it is that we're doing, what those next steps will be. And people feel like they really have the skills to do it. They know how to do it. And the resources are there. The action plan is set in place. But no one's really incentivized to do it. There's not much motivating that work in the back end. It's going to lead people to make slow, gradual change. We're definitely going to provide a space for psychological safety and collective wellness in 2028, right? The slow, gradual change without that necessary feel of urgency, where the people, you all doing the work, it's really needed now. Let's say you have the vision, skills, incentives, and action plan, but there's no resources. Anyone who's tried to do something without the resources knows how frustrating it can be. And so we want to ensure that the resources are there. That might be the time, that might be the physical space. In a lot of things, funding is absolutely a resource, and it's not the only resource that's needed in order to make community change or collective wellness, and promote psychological safety. In fact, when we do it to the greatest extent, there usually aren't, and there isn't much funding for it, but there is a commitment and a willingness to do it, and we're able to work with that. And then maybe there's vision, skills, incentives, and resources, but no action plan. That's when you start to see false starts, people throwing things at the wall. This might be, and to put that in more practical terms, this might be a really good, thoughtful intentions of like conducting repeated surveys. I love surveys. I love conducting surveys. I love developing surveys because it gives us so much insight. But the first question that I always ask is, well, what are we going to do with this data and how will it be utilized? Because a lot of times it can be of something that feels like an actionable start, but without that full plan about how we'll use it or how we'll embed it, we tend to get to a space where we're asking people for information that they've either already provided or that they may even feel apprehensive to sharing. And so we want to create an environment where we're not only just asking folks things, but we also know what those next steps will be. And so finding really good partnerships or internal resources to come up with action plans is really important in creating change. And I see that we are coming up on time. And so I just want to push these closing considerations. In a world that's demanding neutrality, we choose integrity. In systems demanding silence, we choose truth. And so you don't have to put it in the chat, but if you want to, I welcome you to. But this is just something for us to think about, a thought prompt for us. What will change look like, as I asked you earlier? And what is your fierce commitment as a professional during many, many seasons of change, and particularly during this season of change? And yeah, I'll share my email in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing and bring you all up in case there's any questions that you all have. We can spend our last 10 minutes engaging in communal conversation.
So I kind of just wanted to see if I could make some time and space to just share a little bit about our political atmosphere and trying to have conversations with clients around that. I'm feeling like I'm in this space where I have to explain what's going on in the world as far as like mainly around grants and reductions, cuts, and like what to expect. And it is difficult for me to have those conversations with clients because we ultimately really don't know what to expect.
Yeah.
So I think I'm just struggling right now with a lot of pressure around that, adjusting to it just for myself and my social work kind of job, as well as trying to explain it and support my clients in it. Really what's happening is I help facilitate a rapid rehousing program, and it's been under many of the cuts, just like a lot of other programs around social services. So we're just like tightening up the amount of time and services that we can give to clients. And I'm trying to like warn them about that, or just give them a good solid heads up as to we're going to be talking about the goals, and it's going to have to be like a timely type deal. And it doesn't feel good to me because it doesn't feel trauma informed. It doesn't feel it has not been how we've been running our rapid rehousing program. So it's absolutely changes that we have to make, not that we want to, but it's feeling really heavy to explain that to clients.
Yeah, I thank you so much for bringing us into space and honoring that. And I think I might have mentioned it in the beginning, but I don't know if I said where I do. So I teach typically in a master's of social work or social work, BSW, MSW programs, College of Public Health. And this question comes up so much. It comes up in a multitude of different ways, right? Talking about funding in the current political landscape around funding of different programs, where funds are being allocated, where funds are being cut, and how that's impacting service delivery more broadly. It also comes up in some of the assessments that we use or that are necessary for us to continue to get funding. And so one of the things I think is so important and goes back to that the authentic change framework is like that element of transparency. It can be really, really emotionally difficult to constantly have those conversations, whereas where that personal wellness component is uncompromisable. Like we have to be well enough to engage in a level of transparency. And I think transparency shows up in a lot of different ways. I felt really obligated, especially with my role, similarly to you, to have answers for folks and developing a level of comfort to say, at this moment, I really am unsure about what's going to happen. Every time I think I have a grasp or understanding of how this funding is going to be allocated, I'm continuously surprised, but here is what I know. All right. And also transparency about the processes. I find that when we give people context or information, it helps. Folks are wondering, well, why can't I have access to this? Or why do I have to give you this information? And that can feel so vulnerable to have to share different components or elements of of ourselves with someone without knowing where it goes. And so a trauma-informed way, especially when we don't have all of the information, is to find ways to articulate what we do know. So I like to think about it sometimes with like the forms that we use to collect data. You ask people lots of questions about themselves, and we ask it with intentionality for fidelity. But utilizing transparency doesn't denigrate fidelity. We can say, I'm collecting this information. The way that the questions are framed aren't always the most inclusive. In fact, some of them are quite abrupt. This is a questionnaire that we use that we have to submit for funding. And without submitting this information, we are at risk of losing funding. And so I just wanted to share that context with you so that you know how this information is being collected and how it's going to be used. And then proceed to ask the questions. Say, if you have any questions about, we can figure out how you'll answer it together. That's not denigrating that fidelity, but it's allowing us to move at a level of transparency that allows that vulnerability and humanistic approach. And similarly with these conversations, there's no way that I work with people who predict what's going to happen in terms of funding landscapes, and they're pretty confused too. And so, navigating through this inherent uncertainty, these are our commitments that we have to serving you. This is how we'll be able to do this with what resources we have. And I like to be transparent about the positive. We're seeing funding come in places we have not expected to see funding show up, but we're also seeing it being removed in places we definitely didn't expect to see it being removed. So I don't have all the answers in this moment, but we are committed to serving you through X, Y, or Z, and like letting that level of transparency, because otherwise it just feels like people are losing so much without any context, and that can evoke a lot of trauma.
Yeah, that's what I'm feeling from them.
Yeah.
Just feels heavy. That's all.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing it into space and honoring it. I'm certain that many of us are collective in that feeling of heaviness. And a big takeaway I hope from this too is that the more spaces we can create for people to say this is heavy, in and of itself creates a culture where that compassion fatigue is reduced, because we're sharing in that burden of the heaviness of not having a fully a fully formulated response. Yeah. Rhonda shares, especially with knowing all about the systemic institutional structural biases in our society that work against our clients. I very much try to adopt the holistic approach and recognize my own privilege in working with others of different backgrounds. Absolutely. All of these factors can be big in our client's trauma background. Yeah. Yeah, in most spaces and under most circumstances, I'm able to have the opportunity to talk about those systemic and institutional and structural variables. For example, talking about identity-based trauma, what is sanctuary, trauma, acculturative stress for people who are immigrant, refugee, migrant families? What is race-based traumatic stress, cognitive dissonance for folks, insidious trauma? Like all of those things show up in how people present and how people are experiencing in their recovery. And it's really important to me, especially as we talk about recovery, that we honor those nuances for folks and create space for those conversations to happen, and recognize that it is fully within our ability to to address it in that holistic approach. So I really appreciate you bringing that into the space, Rhonda. Any other thoughts or questions? Awesome. Thank you so much, Brianna, and to WAQRR. Thank you so much for having me, for inviting me to the space. It was a pleasure to be able to share in this space with you all. And so,
Yes. Thank you so much, Ashley. It's such great information shared, and it's going to be such a valuable resource as well. Can we share the slides with our attendees today, Ashley?
yeah, with folks who I'll give you a PDF version to share with folks who attended. And then, of course, they'll be in the recording as well.
Okay. So for everyone who is on today, I can send you the slides via your email that you registered with. So we'll get those sent out. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Have
Bye,
a good
everyone.
day. Bye-bye.